Okay guys, welcome to our next tutorial. This is going to be an introduction to something called conditionals. A conditional is also called an if statement. Okay, so we have things called if or else if, and those kind of happen depending on some condition being met. That's why they're called conditionals, okay? And so it's like, if this thing happens, then do this. And if it doesn't happen, then either do nothing or do this other thing, okay? An example of that might be in the previous tutorial, I talked about students being late. And so if, I've got a variable that's counting how many students are late. If a student is late, make them get a late slip. Otherwise, don't do anything. If a student is absent, mark them absent, whatever. This happens because of this other condition being met. Okay, so in short, an if statement or a conditional is waiting for something, some action to trigger something else. Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to be using the example of if you run out of lives, you're dead. Okay, and we're going to have some code blocks that work together to make that happen. So this is our end state here. And so what you'll see is if I click this guy, it's increasing our lives, okay? And this is decreasing our lives until we get to the point where we have 0. And as soon as that happens, oops, it didn't work. Okay, as soon as we get down to 0, it turns our person into a skeleton and they're dead and we can no longer do anything, okay, until we reset. And then again, we're dead. Okay, so that's what we're working on today. And let's take a look at how that works. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get some new sprites. So we'll get rid of the cat and we're gonna go find a couple. Okay, we're looking for skeleton. There's our skeleton. We're looking for Max. Okay, there's Max. We're gonna add her in. And then we need a couple of buttons. Okay, we'll just go grab this guy and we're gonna duplicate. So we have 2. And we're going to rename each of them. Okay, we'll call this one Skelly. Max stay. Button is just going to be 1 up. This button is going to be die. And we're going to change the costume on this one to be the second state, which is the orange version. Okay, so we've got our 2 buttons. And we're also going to change Max from this state over here. Let's go to this costume and we're going to just go to the 3rd state here, and that's set up. So those are all the pieces we need. We do need to align these guys. We're just going to kind of put them in some position that sort of makes sense. I'm going to move that one there, move this one to here, and I'm just going to bump the size up on Max to 150 just to sort of get her roughly the same size as our skeleton. And I'm going to position her about there. That'll do for what we're trying to do. There. Okay. So we're sort of set up at that point. We are going to need a variable. So a variable is, I mentioned previously that a variable is an envelope which keeps some kind of information. In this case, we're going to be renaming this to be lives, because we're talking about how many lives we have. That'll be the variable we're keeping. And I'm going to turn this on so that we can see the variable here in our game. Okay. By default, it's set to 0. Okay, so that's sort of the setup that we need in terms of our stage and kind of all the pieces we need. We need to start adding some code. Before we do that, though, this isn't quite what it needs to look like. We are going to, at some point, turn the visibility off for Max, okay? But we're going to do that with code. So let's take a look at kind of how we do that. The first thing we need to do is we need to set, so we have to sort of think about how this is going to work. So for all of the tutorials, what I'm going to do is, I show you the end state and what we're creating here, and then I go through the steps. But what you should do to do well in this entire unit is, as you look at this, think about what's happening. And as I kind of go through the code, kind of pay attention to, what the terms I'm using and the names of different types of code and what each thing is doing. Okay, it's really easy to just get in the habit of just dragging out the same code blocks that I use without taking in what's happening. And that's an important piece to this. As we go further along in this, these are very much handheld kind of tutorials. And as we progress, things are going to get to the point where, you know, I'm asking you to do things without giving you as much guidance, and you need to be able to think that through. And that becomes challenging if you haven't done it through these early tutorials. Okay, so let's take a look here. What we're going to do, we're going to start off when we create this, we want to do a couple of things. We want to make it so that we have, when we reset this game, we want to have a certain number of lives. By default, there are 0. So let's start with that. Let's go to our events, and we're going to say when this is clicked, let's set our lives to something. I'm going to grab this guy, pull it out here, and by default it's 0. We're going to make it 3. So when I start our game, we're going to start with 3 lives. Okay, that's sort of like resetting our game, whatever it is, to a certain number of lives. And we're also going to have the same code, but that's on Max. We're going to have the same code on Skelly, and we'll look at why a little bit later. Okay, but I can drag that, and I'm going to do the same thing. Events, when clicked, I'm going to here, I'm going to set lives to 3. Okay, all right, so we'll put that in both places for now. The next thing we need to do is we need to start talking about what's going to happen when we get down to 0 and how that's going to happen. So when we do get this this variable down to 0, we need to hide one of these characters. What's going to happen is, if you remember from here, okay, reset this, we only see one. So right now, Skelly is hidden. And then when we get down here, it's going to reverse. Max is going to be hidden, and Skelly is going to be visible. So how do we do that? Well, we can set this so that we're going to use these guys here under looks. We're going to use show and hide. Okay, these are the 2 we need. Now we don't need them both in the same spot. What we're going to do is, by default, because when we start this game, right, I want the Skelly to be hidden. Okay, on Skelly, this is the code for Skelly. I'm going to use hide. Okay, so I want to set this, and what we'll see as soon as I click this, it sets this to 3, and Skelly is hidden. The opposite is true for Max, and I'm going to put show in here, but I'm not going to put it into the block yet. I'll show you why later. We'll come back to it. I'm going to leave it there just to remind myself of kind of the reason that that's there, and we'll kind of address that, why that's important in a minute. Okay, the next step we have to do is we need to look at what's going to happen with these buttons here. Okay, and each of the buttons sort of has to have a little piece of code on it, and the code is triggered by clicking on them. So we're going to think about, well, what kind of event is that? We've talked about this before. This is a when this sprite is clicked. Oops, hold on. Put that back. We need to be on this button. Okay, and so when this sprite is clicked, okay, we're going to do something. Well, what do we want to do? We want to change it so that we lose a life. So let's go down to our variables, okay, and we're going to change variables by, if we're 1-upping, we're going to go up 1, and if we're dying, we're going to go down 1. So here we're going to go, when this sprite is clicked, change lives by -1. Okay, so if I click on this, that's going down, that's going up. Okay, so far that's working, quite straightforward. So far, so good. The next piece is where we add in the conditional. Okay, so we've kind of got this sort of job of these things working. These things are doing the thing they need to do, but we're not checking anything, and that's where the logic and the sort of thinking comes in. Okay, now I mentioned that a conditional is waiting for a trigger. Okay, it's sort of watching for something to happen. Well, what are we waiting? What are we sort of waiting to happen? Well, we're waiting for this variable or number of lives to get down to 0. That's the thing that we care about. Okay, so let's go over to control, and we'll take a look at our conditionals. We have 2. Here is if, and here's a little more of a complicated one, which we'll talk about in a later tutorial. For now, we're going to start off with this guy here, if. Okay, if something, then this space. And what we want to do is, if the condition is met, if the thing we're talking about, which is our lives, okay, happens, then do something. Well, we're saying we want to be able to kind of make sure that this changes only if you have lives. okay? And well, why is that? Let's see. If I'm doing this here and I get down to 0, I shouldn't be able to keep going, right? So I need to make a condition that says, look, if we get down to 0, we have to stop being able to do this. Okay, so let's go back up to reset this. And we go back over here. So we want to say this only happens, this changing of lives only happens in a certain situation. And that situation is using an operator. So if my variable, which is this, which currently is 3, so I have lives. If it's 3 or 2 or 4 or 5 or anything, or really anything over 0, I can keep doing that. But as soon as it's 0, then I need to stop. So I'm going to use this. I could use a greater or less than. In this case, I could use less than, but I'm going to use 0. I'm going to make this, sorry, I'm going to use equals. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to go down and get lives, okay, from my variables list down here. I say if my lives is equal to 0, then, sorry, I should be, that's a mistake. I'm going to say if lives is greater than 0, because in this case, right, I want to be changing, allowed to change this, because remember, this is our 1 up. If my lives are greater than 0, then I'm allowed to make these changes. So let's do this. Okay, so that's okay. Okay, I'm going to put the same code here on die. So I'm going to go over to this button. And I'm going to say I want my if statement, which is here. Okay, I'm going to put this guy inside here. I'm going to get my operator, which is a greater than. I'm going to make it 0. And I'm going to get my lives variable and drop it in here. If the number of lives is greater than 0, then I'm allowed to do this thing. Let's check that that's working. Okay, this continues up, this continues, connect it. This continues down, and it should, each time you can see it's checking. Okay, do I have more than 0? Yes, I do. Okay, keep doing it. Okay, these are going to continue to work until this gets down to 0. Once it gets down to 0, I no longer can make these changes because that's now been locked out because of that if statement. Okay, that trigger has said, okay, we're at a point where this is not greater than 0. You're not allowed to do that anymore. And move this because we don't need it. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Now, what's the other thing we need to do? Well, we also need to change, we look here, right? So once we get this down to 0, we need to do a little switcheroo here. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, we're going to add a conditional here. I'm going to add a conditional here. Okay, so what is that conditional going to be? Well, let's have a think about it. What are we trying to say? We're trying to say if the lives gets down to 0, but the value of lives gets down to 0, I want you to hide Max, and I want to show Skelly. So here we are, Skelly. We're going to go and we're going to grab our if statement. Okay, I say if my variable lives is, in this case, we're going to say greater than 1. Okay, so if this is the case, oh, sorry, less than 1. If lives is less than 1, okay, we're going to show. Okay, so right now let's put lives up to, I'll go here, put lives up. I can't reset it. Right now my lives is 3. And because I check this, if I say if lives is less than 1, which it's not, and I click this, it doesn't do anything. Well, watch what happens when we drop this down below 1. Now if I click this, it shows Skelly. You can see Skelly just popped in there. Okay, I can do the same thing for Max. Let's go over to Max. Okay, I'm gonna leave this out for now, but we'll come back to it. Do the same thing. I'm gonna say if, I'm gonna get an operator, and it's gonna be a less than operator. If my lives is less than 1, right, same thing. I'm gonna say, I want you to hide our girl here. Okay, Max. And right now, because it is 0, when I click this, it hides Max. Okay, great. So I'm going to take that, and I could put this in here. But the problem is, same thing with this. I could attach it here. But the problem is that this will only happen when this is clicked. So notice as this is attached to here, this will only run when we click this button, this flag. So watch what happens when I click this. I click the flag, it's going to run through this set of code. When this is clicked, set lives to 3. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Then it's going to hide Skelly, and then it's going to check this, but it's going to find that it's not, this doesn't resolve to true because we just set lives to 3. Watch, I click this, it sets lives to 3, and it doesn't do this show. Why? Because lives is more than 3. So there's another piece that's missing here. The reason, and this is a kind of another control issue we need to always be checking constantly throughout the whole time the video is running or the animation is running if lives drops down below 3. So what we need to do is we're going to go over to our control and we're going to grab something called a forever loop. Okay, I'm going to take this if statement and put it inside the forever loop. And what that means is when we get to this point, it's always, until we stop this game, it's always going to be checking if lives drops down below 1. So now I'm going to stick this here. I'm going to do the same thing for max. Pull this off of here, go and get my forever loop and put this inside here. All right, I'm still going to leave this out for now. Okay, so now what's happening, okay, when we reset this guy here, okay, let me stop that for a second. I'm going to show both my guys here so you can see. Okay, so what do we want to happen? Well, we want to, when we start this game, I want this to reset to 3. I want to hide Skelly. I want to show Max. All that stuff is happening. And then every time I change one of these guys by clicking here, it's going to add or take away lives. And once that drops down below 1, then we're going to lose the ability to use these clicks, and it's going to switch over from Max to Scully. So notice that this yellow thing is running right now. Why? Because I have this, this forever. As soon as I click this, I'll stop it. As soon as I click this, it does reset my lives and it starts this forever loop and it continually keeps checking. Okay, same thing over here. The same thing is happening on Scully. It's Scully. It's constantly checking to see if this is dropped below. Okay, come back over here. So this is all going to work except for one thing, and I'm going to show you why this is still out of here. So I'm going to stop it. I'm going to run the game, and this is working. It goes up, no problem. This goes down, no problem, and it continues until you get down to the next step. All right. So it just did what we wanted. We hid Max, we showed Skelly, and we lost our ability to do either of these. The only problem is when I reset this game, remember that Max is hidden right now because we just hid her. Over here, we said hide. And when I reset this, she's still hidden, which is why I need to take this guy and stop this and take this guy and stick him right in here. Okay, so now we go, when this is clicked, set my lives to 3. The same thing happens here, so it doesn't matter which which of these is. If you're playing the game, let's reset it. If you're playing the game and I do this, and right now she's showing, I hit this and it resets everything, right? It's back to 3. It resets everything. It doesn't matter if she's showing or if I die. Okay, and now I reset it, it still activates this code. Okay, irrespective. That's why this is in 2 spots. Okay, this part here. Okay, so we hit the green flag, it sets our lives, it shows Max, it hides Skelly, and then forever through the rest of this time, it checks if lives drops down below 1, it's going to show or hide the character appropriately, and these guys are constantly, just every time I click them, they're changing the value until they're not allowed to anymore because of this if statement. Okay, so that's the process of creating this. That's a finished product. The last thing you need to do once you're done here is add in comments and explain what each of these things does. Okay, so to your understanding, what is this doing? Okay, what is this doing? Right click, add comment. Right, if you have more than one comment, you should always spread them out to make them neat and easy to use. But every single one of these blocks needs a comment that explains to me that you understand what's happening in each of these. Okay, when we get through into longer, more complicated tutorials, it's really important that I can look and understand that you understand and that you haven't kind of misunderstood some concept, because that's when things get a bit tricky. Okay, so that's that. Once you're done with it, you're going to do everything we have in previous videos. Okay, you're going to name this U3-4 conditionals. You don't need to put this part in, but you're going to name it, okay, accordingly. You're going to make sure you hit share. And once you do that, from your project page, you need to copy the embed tag, and remember to include the link so that I can see your code blocks. It's great that I can see your animation, but I need to go in here and see all your code blocks as well to make sure that things make sense to me and that you've done everything completely. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Rewatch the tutorial if anything is confusing. If you run up against a roadblock, do drop me an email. Otherwise, good luck with this, and I'll see you in the next video.